Hey everyone, it's time for the metaphor angle. Hurrah, hurrah. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about concept musicals. We'll talk a little bit about cabaret. We've talked about it before with Fosse. We're going to talk about it in a couple chapters with Fosse again, but we're talking about it a little differently this time. And then the um, major explorer of the metaphor angle, Stephen Sondheim. So we'll talk a little about Company, Sunday in the Park with George, and Sweeney Todd. And don't worry, we'll talk about some of the other ones too. So in terms of, working with with concepts and metaphors instead of, just boy meets girl. Conceptually, the book itself and Stemple asked, are these plots without stories? How do we discuss these kind of metaphorical shows where sometimes the plot is incidental to the art or the language or the music or some of the ideas that are coming through? Sometimes there's a tapestry-like theme to the shows, beginning with a show like West Side Story, which, obviously has plot and story and metaphor. But it starts to give people an example of what can be done with the form, where you have, larger conversations about life and conflict that come from smaller stories. As with many genres, there's a literariness that emerges after the genre itself becomes concretized. I like to compare this to the 18th century novel versus the 19th century novel. A lot of the books that I teach in 18th century, so 1700s literature classes, they're reasonably entertaining. There's a literariness to them, but you would mostly pick them up and read them because you were kind of interested in the characters and what was going to happen to them and the particular story that you're reading. If you kind of skip forward a century and look at the 19th century novel and, books like Middlemarch, for example, or Bleak House, you are dealing with a different kind of conceptual coherence and sophistication, where Bleak House doesn't just have a few entertaining characters in it. Bleak House is sort of about the legal system in Britain. It's more metaphorical in an overarching way, as well as being something you would enjoy picking up. So there is a kind of literary significance that emerges as genres mature. And this is something that's happening in other places in the 1960s and 70s, especially with the rise of auteur filmmaking, where you have films themselves that feel more, modern metaphorical. I didn't put Kubrick in here, but he certainly counts as like a 60s, creative control filmmaker. But you also have people like Robert Altman, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, where The Godfather isn't just about a particular family. It's a particular version of Americanness and immigration and travel and, parallel cultures that are happening in the same American spaces as other kinds of American dream stories. These kinds of conceptual musicals are also connected to post-structuralism, postmodern culture. Can a musical be art? And to some people, the answer is yes. And art and commerce have to kind of come together. Making sure people enjoy what they show up for is also important. And I didn't mention Brecht in terms of, kind of as an ancestor of this, but certainly he would count. Cabaret, Candor Ebb, and also Lawrence, Arthur Lawrence, man, just doesn't get enough love. So in the case of Cabaret, it's set in the Weimar Republic. It's economically depressed. We see fascism starting to emerge, ultimately, resulting in the Nazi Party's control of Germany. there's a lot of rich inspiration from that Weimar period. This first link here is basically about the Weimar Republic in fashion. But if you go to the part about cabaret, it's about 35 minutes into the video. So take a look at that or watch more of it because it's interesting. And, the major theme that we're looking at is you have multiple subcultures kind of working together in Weimar Germany. And so, to some extent you have freedom and decadence, and then elsewhere you have another subculture, fascist subculture, grabbing for power. And, as many people have said before and continue to say, people don't know they've succumbed to fascism until after the fact. When larger freedoms are taken away, people realize they've already given away smaller freedoms. The character of the MC is kind of this framing character for the show itself. We see him at the very beginning as kind of corrupt and decadent, often figured as queer and gender nonconforming, and this was part of Weimar Germany. Take a look at this example of Alan Cumming playing the MC in a 1998 revival with Jane Horrocks as Sally. The world of the musical itself starts to become as dark as the world of the MC that's introduced us to it. And he seems less odd to us the more we kind of submerge ourselves in it. There's this kind of Brechtian confrontation, approximation. The MC is a great example of performance as gesture. We don't know this person's full backstory, but we see our way in well enough. We'll talk about the dance more but when we talk about Fosse. But here are some good examples of the deployment of metaphor in the show. There's the money duet between Sally and the MC, and there's also If You Could See Her Through My Eyes, which is sort of chilling and terrifying. These are both of these links are from the film with Joel Grey and Liza Minnelli. So let's get to Sondheim. I mean, it's almost unimaginable how good he was able to be. He went to Oklahoma the night it opened. They knew the Hammersteins when he was growing up, his family. When he worked on West Side Story, I think he wrote it when he was 27. That he works with Julie Stein. And these would have been fantastic enough accomplishments if he had never gone anywhere else in his career. And he used these collaborations to improve and develop his own metaphorical approach and create new kinds of shows. His musical composition is definitely influenced by Bernstein. It's modern, it's sometimes dissonant. Use of non-traditional sounds. I'm thinking of those factory whistles in Sweeney Todd. Love to experiment with form. You've got a little night music entirely in variants of 3/4 time, waltz time. Awareness of setting, character, musical tropes, intricate wordplay and rhyming. Into the Woods, as an example, is one of those shows where the first act is sort of the beginning, middle, and end of certain fairy tales. And then the second act is Once Upon a Time Later. I know for a fact that people left Into the Woods after Act 1. I was in it, and my friend played the wolf. I played the baker's wife. And his parents went home after Act 1, but that was also the entirety of his character. So, it was kind of funny, but also they got to see him. Pretty fun. So let's talk about one of the earliest kind of metaphorical works of Sondheim. You've got Company, which is a comparison of marriage and city life, specifically living in Manhattan. A metaphor that kind of links these disparate characters' stories. It's a tapestry of relationships and a tapestry of New York. Living in a city is chaotic and it can be lonely, but it can also give you this thrill of being alive, as one of the songs says. Virtually all other musicals are about getting two people together, a man and a woman. Company actually talks about life after marriage, and there's that wonderful song, Sorry, Grateful, which you can see this is an example from the 2008 revival. Also openly criticizing compulsory heterosexuality, heteronormativity. The character Amy in this Patter song called Getting Married Today, it ends, she ends up marrying the guy, but at the same time, it's about panic. It's about fear. It's not about marriage as this is your goal. And in some ways, with all of Sondheim, the difficulty of the show is the point. It could be the difficult language, the difficult way to summon the energy that you need to belt out a song like Ladies Who Lunch. And this is Elaine Stritch, who kind of originated it. When you listen to it, if you own a caftan, wear the caftan to listen. Sunday in the Park with George. And in some ways, this is really about art for art's sake. It is the story of the composition of a painting. How is that a musical? He finds a way. So it's about the painting A Sunday on La Grande Jatte. If you've ever seen the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, it is housed in the Art Institute of Chicago. And you can see it there. Seurat was an impressionist. He worked in pointillism, which is using tiny dots of paint that when you stand back create cohesive images, hence impressionism. And the musical itself dramatizes the composition of the painting and Seurat's imagined relationship with a muse or artist model who is named, of course, Dot. And it intercuts the struggles of a contemporary artist and descendant who is also named George. So it makes plain that the difficult conditions underlying the creation of major art have sustained across the century. It's from about 100 years after the Sunday painting was made. I think it's from 1984-85, and the painting is 1884. And it really is possibly the most metaphorical of the metaphorical musicals. And you see two of Sondheim's greatest interpreters, Mandy Patinkin and Bernadette Peters, performing this, essential number from it. Sweeney Todd. And I know a lot of people know the more recent film. I'm going to talk about a little bit older Broadway show of it, but certainly feel free to bring in all of your background. Partly adapting A Penny Dreadful, partly inspired by Frank Norris's McTeague. It's a very layered revenge tragedy. There are some spoilers here that, feel free to avoid until you've seen it. So Todd vows to destroy a judge he believes has driven his wife to suicide and stolen his daughter. Not good. The elderly judge, very elderly, who was too old for the wife, really, now plans to marry the daughter. It's all kinds of levels of gross. He kills the judge, so, we don't necessarily feel bad about that, but there's a lot of other murders that we do feel bad about. Mrs. Lovett, his former neighbor, has lied to Sweeney Todd about his wife Lucy's death. Said she took the poison she did, never said that she died. Lucy had brain damage from the poison, and she's been roaming the stage throughout the show, kind of not disguised, but hidden in plain sight as a very blunt sex worker. She recognizes Todd. Several times she says, "Don't I know you, mister?" He becomes paranoid that she's witnessing his crimes, and so he kills her. He doesn't recognize her, but then he learns about, the real betrayal. He's killed the person he loved the most. He confronts Lovett. She confesses she lied because she loved him herself. And then after that, he tricks her into trusting him, and then he pushes her into a giant incinerator as revenge for Lucy. Astonishing performances from Angela Lansbury, Len Cariou, as well as George Hearn. Both of them played Sweeney very well. Innovative rotating giant set, this combination, pie shop, home, barber shop, trapdoor, all this stuff in there. Check out some 1979 reviews of the show. And here's a secret video that someone snuck in a giant brick of a camera from 1979. And one final note on this show, and one of the reasons I wanted you to at least see some of the Lansbury version, is that she and the different Sweeney she played opposite, they really seem to understand acting from the 1840s, as well as the kind of fullness of the script. They have this garish makeup, like 19th century grease paint. The Tim Burton one's a bit more goth, I think. But here it's like watching some evidence of a past we were never able to get to see. And some of the slicker remakes don't seem to get at the kind of caricature or ugliness.